I think we will be decriminalized at least within 10 years.
More and more people are recognizing that cannabis and THC-based products are less corrosive to them than alcohol.
Legalization movement been getting popular in Taiwan, and more younger generations are supporting this topic.
None of these substances is benign, and it's incredibly important to consider them, especially in context.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Tomasz Koper, sitting in for Divya Gopalan. There's a small but growing number of countries and territories around the world where doctors can give patients medicine derived from cannabis. An even smaller group of countries has made it legal for anyone to use the plant, also known as marijuana, for recreational purposes. Everywhere else, though, you're likely to find groups of citizens advocating for changes in cannabis regulation. That includes Taiwan, where marijuana is a Category 2 narcotic alongside amphetamines, and its growing, transporting, or selling may land you in prison for life. To help us understand the motivations behind pushing for more lenient marijuana laws, we welcome lawyer and activist Zoe Lee joining us from Taipei. And for a perspective from a country where cannabis can be legally bought and used, we are joined by President and CEO of the Cannabis Council of Canada, George Smitherman. Welcome both of you to the show. Zoe, let me start with you. How long have you been involved in cannabis activism in Taiwan, and what made you choose that particular issue?
I started since 2019, and it was a funny story. The reason why I joined this movement is because I've been smoking illegally since I was in law school, so that would be around more than 10 years ago. So first the stoner, then the lawyer, and the activist. But I smoke in Thailand, not in Taiwan. That's another thing I have to put that clear.
Okay. So George, turning to you, could you tell us a little bit about your organization and what you're trying to achieve in Canada?
Here we have a regulated industry. That is producers that are licensed by the government. That's who I represent as a national industry association, sometimes called a trade association, representing the interests of licensed producers and processors of cannabis. There's about 900 of those licensed in Canada, and about 300, I'd say, that are commercially active in a very competitive environment. Canada just celebrated 5 years of legalization of adult use cannabis. That's produced 3,500 retail stores across Canada, which, as you probably know, is a big country, but with a population still just of about 40 million people.
Zoe, well, speaking of the anniversary, the 5 years, how far away do you think Taiwan is from relaxing its legislation on cannabis use?
I think we will be decriminalized soon, at least within 10 years. And if we stay positive, that'll probably be 5 years. That's around 5 years to 10 years. Because under current law system in Taiwan, no one will throw into the prison just because you have less than 20 grams of cannabis or you just simply consume cannabis. We either send you to rehab or give you therapy or give you a fine, but not really lock you in. So we could say that's de facto decriminalization. But if we want to do it de jure decriminalization, they'll need to modify the law. So that's the reason why I say it probably would take 5 to 10 years.
Do you think that the Taiwanese society is ready to accept these kind of changes in law?
For now, I don't think so. For now, I really don't think so, especially the election is coming, so both major parties, they are sort of demonize those users, not just cannabis, but all the substances users. But I would stay positive is because a lot of people work in justice system believes de facto decriminalization that helps to deal with those people who are really addicted to all kinds of substances. Some political party, like a smaller one, like Green Party, brought up this decriminalization policy in this election. So I think there's still a possibility.
Well, George, what was the road to legalization like in Canada, and what kind of social legal changes were necessary to get there?
Right. Well, we have to recognize that Canada is a big country, and regions in Canada, particularly I would say British Columbia, have had a reputation for decades and decades and decades for BC weed. So we can't pretend that that's something that was kind of foreign to the landscape. Rather, that's been very, very common, and lots of people have been growing and consuming cannabis with the threat of criminal prosecution. The criminal prosecution was more likely to be wielded on marginalized racial minorities, young Black men, much more likely, and Indigenous Canadians, much more likely to have had criminal sanction for cannabis use. Around the year 2000, however, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that cannabis was a medicine in certain circumstances and that Canadians warranted access. That greatly increased awareness and participation around cannabis, and was in a sense like that de facto decriminalization that Zoe spoke of. And I think that the final step was in the election of 2015. Our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who is the son of a former Prime Minister, but was then the leader of a party in poor third place, promised to legalize adult recreational cannabis if elected. And indeed, he was elected in part because of that. And indeed, he did do it. Now, he's not a very popular politician in Canada today, but the policies around cannabis legalization were quite popular amongst the public. And even through legalization and after 5 years, only about 20% of the Canadian public is steadfastly opposed to cannabis legalization, some of them with moral, religious, or cultural motivation.
Well, let's bring it back to Asia for a second, because the only country in the region where cannabis laws have been relaxed is Thailand. However, that doesn't mean the plant has been made completely legal. Using it in public may result in a fine or even jail time if someone complains. Some also say that relevant rules could have been made clearer. Among them is entrepreneur and activist Kiri Chapaka in Bangkok. Take a listen.
I would say with the lack of rules that currently exist, it doesn't mean that there's no rules, but it's just that there is no rules where we can grow as an industry. There are people that are within the industry are also still struggling because it is a new product in the market where it used to be known as narcotics for a very long time. It takes time to change the perspective. Don't forget that we are still a conservative country. There are cannabis and kratom, unfortunately, those two drugs and two herbs actually are more for the lower class. So there's still that whole association of the different classes.
Well, let's break it down, because there are a few things there. George, I'm going to start with you. In Canada, did cannabis legislation arrive in a neat little package, or was it also a gradual process, kind of like what we're seeing in Thailand right now?
The one thing I would just want to comment on is that, of course, Canada is a country that's very multicultural and has tremendous population influences from all parts of Asia. And some of those same, let's say, more conservative perceptions around cannabis and follow on from the opium wars and all of those things which you'd be aware of are evident actually still within the positions held by Canadians who may have origins from your various parts of the world. I know from my experiences in Thailand, no one cared how drunk you got, but in a certain sense, one of the things that's coming around is more and more people are recognizing that cannabis and THC-based products are maybe less corrosive to them than alcohol. With respect to your question is, the two big movements were that the Supreme Court created the constitutional protection for medicinal cannabis. That was a bombshell, like a transformational decision. And Mr. Trudeau's legalization of cannabis at an adult recreational basis was the second bombshell. So I think I think that the Canadian model is probably not adaptive. Most countries can't hope for the achievement of an all-at-once courts or an all-at-once legislative action. The other thing is that plant, the cannabis plant, that's got cannabinoids, including many that aren't about getting you high. And I think more and more, the focus around CBD, the effects of wellness for people like me that are around 60 years of age who have challenges with sleeping, inflammation, light pain, anxiety. Many of these wellness orientations are not about the intoxicating part of the plant. So the cannabis plant and cannabinoids are also going to make the conversation more, in a certain sense, more complicated, but perhaps produce more avenues for medicinal cannabinoids like CBD-based therapies.
Well, Zoe, I want to ask you about one other thing that Katie mentioned in the video, which is in Thailand, marijuana is often associated with sort of lower classes. There is a stigma attached to it. What are the perceptions of cannabis in Taiwan?
The funny thing is in Taiwan, that's opposite. In Taiwan, the stereotype of cannabis users, well, this I quoted from the government, okay? It will be at least with a college degree and white collar and with overseas living experience. I think that's really funny because for a period of time, when the police officers trying to catch people might smoke, or they will tend to search the vehicles on the street, they will the car with foreigners inside, or people speak English. I think the imagination or the image of cannabis user in Taiwan is way different than in Thailand.
Well, George, coming back to you, one thing that is often brought forward as an argument for decriminalization or legalization is tax revenue, job creation, stimulating the economy with a lot of new companies coming into the space. How has that worked out for Canada? Is the country really seeing increased revenue and economic activity?
You know, it's worked out better for Canada than it has for the investors in cannabis because it was overstimulated in many ways. But just to give you an example, using Canadian dollars, $45 billion of investment in a 3-year period, much of it during COVID, to build out the production and retail capacity. That supported 150,000 jobs. The cannabis industry is sustaining tens of thousands of jobs and producing hundreds of millions of dollars a year for governments, especially the provincial and territorial governments. Canada legalized it at the national level, but the operations at the retail distribution level are province and territory led. They get most of the money, and they also make money through their distribution role. So it has been lucrative for governments and is sustained. In remote parts of Canada, you find a lot of cannabis production has brought economic vitality back to those communities. However, the model overall is not a profitable one. So after 5 years, fewer than 20% of companies are reporting being profitable. So that's why I started by saying it's been good for Canada and for governments, but it's been very challenging for cannabis investors, that's for sure. And we're working hard to make some shifts that can create a more sustainable and healthy industry. Of course, we're fighting it out with a very well-entrenched illicit market, frequently operated by gangs, and getting access to commercial tools like the internet and mail service delivery, using tools that we as a regulated sector cannot use.
Many countries have severe punishments for cannabis-related offenses, which includes Taiwan and until recently Thailand. Gloria Lai is the regional director of the International Drug Policy Consortium based in Bangkok. She says that the harm from putting an offender away in prison for marijuana is often greater than that from using the substance itself.
I mean, cannabis has been a part of culture and practices here for a long time, like in even spiritual practices, as well as part of food. And it's not just in Thailand, it's in many other countries in the region. And I think if other countries also allowed space to acknowledge that, that's a nice way, that's a good start, I think, to further conversation around how to manage the use and other activities relating to the substance. And not just for cannabis, but for other substances too. And I think taking that kind of evidence-based or rational approach, pragmatic approach, recognizing that just banning a substance and then punishing people as hard as we can has not been an effective way of doing it, and we should not continue doing it. So let's try to have a conversation about what we can do differently, as well as acknowledging the harms that have been caused to people. Because the harmful impacts of giving someone a criminal conviction, locking them up, are huge. And those costs need to be factored in, along with the harms of consumption of certain substances.
Zoe, we've heard in the video Gloria talking about how putting someone away for cannabis-related offenses only adds to the potential harm of consuming the substance. You mentioned at the top of the show that Taiwan doesn't necessarily put people away in jail the first time around and for smaller amounts. So what ways of dealing with cannabis-related offenders does Taiwan have currently?
There are two ways for punishment in Taiwan. The one way is we rehab. That means we will put those users in certain facilities it's basically like a jail for 35 to 40 days. The other way is therapy. That means you only have to go to the hospital every month and do urine tests for a year and a half to 2 years, and you're free to go. But both ways will not leave you any criminal records, and the prosecutors will not prosecute you by using these two methods.
Well, George, cannabis has been legal in Canada for a number of years, so I'm curious about what kind of data are we seeing coming out of Canada that could add to this rational conversation about drug policies that Gloria mentioned in the video we just watched?
Well, the point that Gloria made and also that Zoe just made certainly rang true in review of the social side impacts of cannabis legalization. Most significant was that we've gone from charging tens of thousands of Canadians and giving them criminal records, and we've stopped. And the impact of that on the social development and economic prospects of those individuals is the most discernible upside. And considering also that those cannabis charges were frequently, in a certain sense, an opportunity for police to focus their enforcement on racialized communities, this is a really, really significant social step forward.
Well, Zoe, staying with criminal aspects of cannabis legislation, a prominent YouTuber has recently been caught with a small amount of marijuana. And even though he's not very likely to face actual legal consequences or see jail time, as we've discussed so far. Others have expressed concerns about the impact of this case on his career, his relationship with businesses. And now, I know you've been following this case closely. Why has that garnered your attention?
I think there are probably two reasons. One is the government or the candidates, certain candidates, trying to show they against all the narcotic. And the other reason is our current government probably don't like, because legalization movement been getting popular, more and more popular in Taiwan, and more younger generations are supporting this topic. So I think this is another reason why the government trying to use those influencers, like by catching them just using cannabis to threat the public or the younger generation, saying like, look, that's how drugs could destroy your life.
George, there are concerned voices out there. One of them would be the U.S. National Institute for Drug Abuse that say more people smoking marijuana means that more people will use it in harmful ways. So isn't a rational solution to this just keeping marijuana illegal just in case? Don't we have enough problems with alcohol and other substances? Why add another potential harmful substance into the mix?
Well, I think that research like that you reference reinforces the necessity, firstly, of recognizing that none of these substances is benign. And it's incredibly important to consider them, especially in context. And I think that's what Gloria's reference was to, that we need to look at relative harms. I think that you cannot, at least in my country, in North America, cannabis was very, very well entrenched and isn't something that you can wish away by denying it a regulatory framework. It was there. And it was uncontrolled, and accordingly, the public concluded that it was better to be a controlled, legalized, but in a heavily regulated context. So I think that the point is, yes, it does make sense statistically, doesn't it, that there are going to be a percentage of in any population base that is going to be at risk of misuse of cannabis, as that is certainly the case with alcohol and other substances. And I have my own personal history there. So we can't be benign about these things. We can't be blind to these things. But at the same time, I think when one looks at preparing youth for the options that are before them, we have to recognize that they will have a range of options, and that the informed youth is really, really an important part of our responsibilities.
Now, we're almost out of time, but before we go, I want to show you one more thing. From our conversation so far, you may get the impression that marijuana conversation in Taiwan is pushed into the shadows. But here's one place that keeps its perfectly legal products out in the open for everyone to see.
I was born in 1990, and I think people that's younger than me, I can tell the huge difference from like back then when I was at their age. Like people in high school these days, they start to talking about like weed, not like legalization weed, but the way how they look at it, they don't look at it as like a drug. But in my mom's generation, like last generation I always said, they actually look at this as a huge deal. I would say like 80%, no 70%, it's young people. People that's around like, I would say like 20 to 40, 50. But personally, I would say like everybody. We have old lady here. We have like two like very old couples that come in here to get paper all the time, and they just smoke at home. We are looking to push the legalization in, hopefully to push in within like 10 years. Like people say 5 years, like some like doctors or some like partners, they says it's going to take 5 years, but like myself, I think it's going to be 10 years. And like, not gonna lie, I don't even think it will be legalization on 10 years. That's one of the most events we host. It's called Green Sensation. We started 2017, and that was the first time, and we had, I think we only had like 300 people. And the police, they have 200 police, so 500 in total. 300 of us and 200 of them. They probably thought we were gonna do something crazy, maybe like 200 people smoking on the street or something, and every year it's just growing, it's growing. The last year, I mean this year that just passed, 2023, we had around like 3,000 people, and we're happy with it because when we're on the street, we see a like bus driver just stop on the road and just give us a thumbs up, and people that's on the street, ladies, and tell us good job. If marijuana was legal in Taiwan, we would like to jump into the different label. Selling a little bit of marijuana in Taiwan, I think it shouldn't be a big deal. And I think Taiwan is like so much fun, we have so much food to eat, and we just need a little bit of something. Like popcorn chicken, it'd be so crazy, right? You just can't stop.
And with that, we have sadly arrived at the end of today's show. Thank you to both my guests, lawyer and activist Zoe Lee, joining us from Taipei, and CEO and President of the Cannabis Council of Canada, George Smitherman, joining us from Canada. And to our audience at home, it's been great to have your company. Thank you, and stay connected.